Hello, and welcome to a special presentation by QUTV. I'm Kai Grover, and this is Global Perspectives. Joining me today is Dr. Kristina Mouzakis. She's a psychology professor at QU. Hi.
Hi, Kai. Thank you for having me today.
Of course. Where are you from, and how has that shaped your global perspective?
I am from Greece. My parents are Greek. They used to live, like we were chatting earlier, they used to live in the United States, Chicago suburbs for a long time, and decided they were going to move our family back to Greece. It's very complicated how the Greek culture has shaped my perspective because classical Greek culture has strongly shaped a lot of Western culture as we think of it today, in good ways and in bad ways. Modern Greek culture tends to be very non-conforming, and it's interesting to see how history influences cultural beliefs and values through time. There's an emphasis on anti-establishment in Greece, anti-capitalism. Like I was saying, a lot of ideas that we hold in the United States are not really held by modern Greek culture. So for example, oftentimes Greek people will side with Russia and Putin politics, which have been, I don't know in the future, have been sort of an anti what we think here in the United States.
Yeah. So outside of Greece, where have you traveled and how has that affected your worldview?
Yeah, Kai, thanks for that question. Kai, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I have been very lucky as part of academia, doing my graduate degree, going to conferences. I've traveled to a lot of places, mostly in Europe, but a lot of places within the United States as well, mostly bigger cities, not rural areas, and I love it. So one of the things that I look to when I travel is food culture, food history. So how do these places use certain fruits and vegetables, spices that we use or we don't use? How did these come into the culture historically? So what type of trading brought these things in there? And so that's very interesting to me. Cultures communicate a lot with each other, and oftentimes we don't realize. And so we pick up on a lot of things, and we don't realize that we pick them up from different cultures. So that's one of the things that interests me. Other than that, I love looking at, like I said, places that I travel. I try to go to museums, know about their history of the people. I love talking to the people, if that's possible, if we have a shared language. Looking at art. How people live their day-to-day lives, how has it affected my worldview? That I think I'm going to say this a lot, that people are more similar than we are different. And so we think that we have big differences in cultural ideologies and practices, but in fact we don't. Most of the things that humans do are a common human experience. And so it constantly reminds me of that when I travel to these different places.
Nice. So what are some cultural traditions or memories that you have like, this has really been like a staple in the way that you see the world?
Yeah, this was a tricky question because I'm mostly going off of memories or things that sort of stuck with me. And so I don't know if any other Greek person or anybody with similar cultural experiences as me would answer this question similarly. But what came to me to answer this question was religious experiences. And so for a long time, Greece is a homogeneous place. It had been in the past mostly the same type of person. Greek blood, quote unquote. Greek people look the same. Greek people behave the same. We are homogeneous in religious practices, or we were more so 15, 20 years ago since I've left. And so we have common experiences of celebrating religious holidays in the same way across the country and even across the globe with other Greek people. And so that kind of stuck with me. So we do like midnight mass things for Easter. Easter is a bigger holiday than Christmas or any other holiday, religious holiday, Christian holiday in Greece. I remember, like, on my island, we would do Friday night, so Good Friday, we would, at midnight, people would throw pottery out of their windows to make, a big ruckus to symbolize whatever religious thing that symbolizes, the earthquake of Jesus having died. But, so I think those are a lot of the cultural practices that I remember or that I think of as cultural practices. But again, food.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what is your cultural experience here in Quincy, and what are the highlights of that?
Yeah, so I would say for this one, I would have to say that oftentimes we think of culture as a country that shares a language, that shares a common history, common religion, common traditions, but culture is a broader thing than that. So in the United States, we have a lot of different pockets of subcultures. Right, look north versus south is like the biggest sort of contrast that you could see different cultural practices in the United States. And so even though we're in the same country and we've had a similar history in the last few hundred years, I consider those as different cultures. And so being in Quincy means that compared to being in a bigger city, I've spent some time in Chicago and Los Angeles, and so being in Quincy is definitely a little bit of a culture shock when it comes to how similar people are here generally in the region. That there's fewer diverse ideas, diverse types of people. QU is a little bit better. I mean, I see students who are from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and it's great to have that. And I wish we could have, and hopefully we can have more people that bring in different ideas, different perspectives from their cultures, their life experiences within the United States even. So QU is, generally, when I talk to my students, the culture that they see here is mostly the athletic culture. And even specifically, if you go even more narrow, the specific sports have subcultures, different ways of thinking and doing things. And so I haven't had too many experiences with those, mostly through what my students share with me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how does exposure to other cultures shape us and shape community, or in your life, shape you and your community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am a psychologist, and so a lot of what we do is we talk about how social groups, cultural groups, influence individuals or even other social and cultural groups, and that happens all the time. We've had, in history, small groups, small minority cultural groups have influenced the majority groups. Mm-hmm. I always bring up punk culture. So punk culture was, has always been anti-establishment and anti-conformity. But like 10, 15 years ago, it became main culture to have facial piercings and to have different styles of hair, shaving, and the mohawk or the faux hawk was popular. That's punk culture. That's a subculture that became mainstream for at least a little bit. Even today, a little bit. It's considered sort of normative. So being exposed to other cultures can have big effects on us. We share stories. We share ideas. I talk about how the more diverse interactions we have with different people from different cultures, different experienced life histories, we tend to be more creative. We tend to be more open to accepting more ideas from people. And so for me, I love traveling because it forces me to sort of step out of my comfort zone and see what other people are doing. How other people are living, what values, right? I mean, in the United States, we have generally we have a poor idea of what work is and what work-life balance is and what well-being means. And in most parts of the world, they don't have those ideas. And so I'm constantly reminded, right, I don't have to work 60 hours a week. I need to invest in social relationships and having good experiences with people that love me and that I love. So exposure to cultures is typically a good thing. Typically, most of the time, not always, but.
Yeah, and what does having a global perspective mean to you?
Having a global perspective, to me, as a person who's had experience seeing other cultures and being within different cultures, and also as a person who's trained as a social psychologist, it means to me empathy and respect. So being able to understand that other people do things differently, but there's mostly no right or wrong way. And we shouldn't judge people in those ways, right? Being able to not just tolerate other people's practices, but understand that they are just as free as we are to have their own values, their own goals, different ways that they pursue those things. Generally speaking, right? I mean, some cultural practices are harmful to the people within those cultures, whether they realize it or not. But generally speaking, humans are, like I said earlier, we're more the same than we are different. We have the human condition. We have the same brain that creates these cultures. We trade with each other throughout history. I mean, thousands of years, we're not isolated cultures. We communicate with each other. And so we've always shared ideas and we've always shared practices. And I have some friends that do cultural research, and they show things like most people in most parts of the world have the same schedules, they have the same love and relationships with their families. Most of them eat meals with their families after work. So little things like that that we sort of overlook as cultural components, they are cultural components, and we are more similar than we are different.
Yeah.
So.
And what cultural identity or situation are you most proud of?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a little bit hard for me to answer. So for this one, again, I dive into classical ideas of Greekness or Greek culture. So Greek culture has been used as sort of a standard for Western democracies, as like, oh, this is, the philosophers got it right, the scientists got it right, and we look up to them for all of these answers that we consider to be the golden standards even today in many Western cultures, right? The classical Greeks were those are our inspirations for a lot of things that we've done in our modern cultures. However, I do have to say, so I'm indoctrinated in the idea that yes, the Greek people did invent everything. They are a great model for moral and scientific accomplishments. I'm indoctrinated in that, and so I'm proud to be part of that culture, or for that to be part of my cultural identity. I do have to say, though, that because I've come into contact with other cultures, understanding history, that we oftentimes use classical Greek culture to perpetuate various stereotypes. Biggest one being that whiteness is good. So I've had conversations with archaeologists that tell me that we see these beautiful classical Greek statues that are white marble, and we make assumptions about the good standard of what a good, moral, smart, human citizen is in the world. And in fact, those statues weren't white. They used to paint the marbles. The skin tones back in the classical world didn't really matter. But when we started excavating those things in the 20s, we started perpetuating this idea of white is good, white is smart, white is better. And throughout history, we've had examples of non-white persons building great civilizations that we refuse to recognize as great civilizations, right? Like in the classical studies, they refuse to think of ancient Egyptians as people with dark skin, right? And so, the Greek culture stands in the way of, understanding that whiteness isn't the ideal, that whiteness didn't develop all these things. First language was developed in Mesopotamia, which is the Middle East now. The Pythagorean theorem, so mathematics that are attributed to Greek mathematicians, we have evidence that they existed at least 100 years before, and it also came from the Middle East, right? But we refuse to think of those things. And so I am proud of my culture, at least the Greek culture, the Greek part of it, but I also think that it's very important to understand that classical Greek culture has been used to perpetuate certain ideologies that I don't believe in, I'm not proud of. We need to understand history better to understand different cultures, and that different cultures, again, they might be different, but we're mostly similar, that there's value in knowing different ideas and different histories. I mean, in the United States, we refuse to believe that native cultures had progress, right? We're now sort of discovering large pyramid structures and mythologies and ideologies and inventions that the native and indigenous persons in the Americas developed. So a long answer, but I think it's important when we talk about at least the Greek culture and what we have associated with Greek culture, rightly and wrongly.
Yes, and that is very profound. And do you have any final thoughts, advice, or insight on the global community?
Yeah. So again, reiterating that psychology tells us, sociology tells us that mostly we're more similar than we are different. And if you're looking for differences, you find differences. And differences divide us. They're more likely to divide us than similarities are. All humans have more similar experiences than we have different experiences. We have similar milestones than we have different milestones. I call it a shared human experience. We have the same DNA, the same brains. We develop things very similarly. Most of the time, one culture is not right or wrong. That one's a big one. So we tend to think, this is how we do things. This is how my parents said we should do things. This is how my grandparents said we should do things. This is how everybody else around me does things. And it's a way of doing things, but going out and seeing different ways of doing the same things helps us expand the way we think, and helps us expand the way we think about other people, that there's space for all of us. And it's to our benefit to want to ask people questions and to want to know how other people live and how other people do things. Diversity is a good thing.
Yes, and I agree with that. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Kai.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you for joining us for Global Perspectives. Find more interviews like this, go to QUmedia.net, and have a great day.